We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, and we're thrilled to bring you about responsible AI and why it matters. And my name is Elizabeth Aloni. I'm with Schneps Media. Schneps Media is the largest local media company in New York Metro. We publish over 70 newspapers, magazines, websites, webinars, podcasts, and events throughout Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, Westchester, Long Island, and Philadelphia. Today, it is our great honor to bring you this important topic with incredible experts. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce our moderator, Steve Kunion, and I want to tell you a little bit about him. Say hello to everyone, Steve. So Steve is a director of entrepreneurship at NYU Tandon School of Engineering, founder of the NYU Tandon Future Labs, and with Julius Dianovich, co-founded and is director of the NYU Center for Responsible AI. The Center for Responsible AI is a comprehensive laboratory for accelerating responsible AI practices. Together with researchers, collaborators, and partners, the center is building a future in which responsible AI is the only kind accepted by society. Steve brings to the center his experience of working to build the NYU Tandon Future Labs over the last decade. The Future Labs was the first business incubator supported by New York City, where over 170 startups have gone on to successfully graduate from the program for a combined graduate portfolio valued at over $1.8 billion. Together with the two programs, they are establishing an AI for Good startup program, creating opportunities to apply artificial intelligence to societal problems that are otherwise overlooked by the market. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you all for joining us for the session. If you allow me to perhaps set the stage for what we'll be discussing today. Artificial intelligence continues to transform businesses and society, putting pressure on companies in nearly every industry to invest in this rapidly evolving space. Ensuring that AI can transfer from lab to market is one of the biggest economic opportunities of our generation, and one that is instrumental to the health of our ecosystem and the competitiveness of the United States. In the absence of oversight and regulation, wealth from AI is already being concentrated in companies that are able to harness and deploy it. In most cases, without regard to whether or not it's done in a way that is also beneficial to society. As AI exerts an ever-increasing effect on our lives, the need for responsible AI grows every day. Responsible AI may already be a widely discussed topic, but few companies are going beyond the discourse and into implementation. And the data supports that. With large numbers of companies seeing responsible AI, while large numbers of companies are seeing responsible AI as a component of business success, according to the App in 2020 State of AI and Machine Learning Report, only 25% of those companies surveyed said unbiased AI is a mission-critical aspect of their business. But let's be honest, the number that have actually implemented responsible AI practices into their engineering teams is likely much lower than that. AI built responsibly is known to be less biased, more effective, and works better for more people. Not using an ethical lens when building AI tools and AI solutions can have dire consequences for your brand's reputation, for your customer experiences, and not to mention society at large. If you need a case in point, look no further than the social media algorithms that power what we see when we open Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And they're not the only ones, and many companies get it so wrong. Why is that the issue? Well, one hypothesis is that the absence of clear and consistent best practices is creating ambiguity and misconception around the topic. Recently, various authorities and organizations around the world are coming together to try to solve this problem. This is also precisely why my colleague Julius Dianovich and I formed the NYU Center for Responsible AI, where we, alongside such efforts around the world, are working on this problem. Today, with my colleagues that you see on the line, we're going to speak about the opportunity space for responsible AI and so much more. So the way we're going to cover our topics today is we have three fantastic speakers. To make it easier for all of you to digest the information, we're going to go into a fireside chat with each one of them one at a time, starting with Julia, followed by Stefan Verhulst and Eric Corbett. Each one of these fireside chat will be roughly 10 to 15 minutes. We hope to end by 3:45, at which time we'll bring everyone back for Q&A from the attendees. So please keep your questions going through the chat function. We will review them all over the time that the speakers are presenting and through the fireside chat, and we will ask them at 3:45. And with that, please help me welcome our first and keynote speaker on the subject, Julius Dianovich. Julia, may I ask you to introduce yourself? And I know you've prepared a brief primer on responsible AI so that we all have a common understanding of what we mean when we say responsible AI for the rest of the session. Julia?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Steve. And I will be very brief with kind of the intro, and then we will dive right into the content of today's conversation. So I'm Julius Dianovich. I am an assistant professor of computer science and engineering at the Tandon School of Engineering at NYU. And I'm also an assistant professor of data science at New York University. Together with Steve, I direct the newly established Center for Responsible AI. And the goals of the center, Steve already eloquently described, but essentially what we work on is how to bring insights from computer science and data science, social science, policy, law, and education to make sure that we as a society create a nuanced and fine-grained understanding of the role of technology in society. And so that we are not bouncing between these harmful extremes of techno-optimism, where the premise is that technology can single-handedly solve all of these deep-seated societal problems that we have created, like gender bias and racial bias in hiring. And the other harmful extreme is techno-bashing that says that technology can do nothing to help society move forward and therefore should be dismissed outright. So what our goal is at the center, and my own personal goal, is to make it so that we come to a more nuanced understanding here. And so as the first thing that I would like to do today, I want to share with you a couple of thoughts on what artificial intelligence is. So what is AI? And if somebody could confirm for me that you're seeing my screen and that it's the right screen, that would be spectacular.
It looks great.
Okay, great. So let's try to define AI. And admittedly, it's a tall order, and 5 or so minutes won't be enough, but let's try to make an effort here. So what is this artificial intelligence, AI, and why do we care? AI is great. The convergence of unprecedented data collection capabilities, enormous computational power, and broad acceptance of data collection and analysis as a way to move society forward are offering us tremendous opportunities to do good. We can accelerate scientific discovery in areas ranging from astrophysics to medicine. We can boost innovation in a myriad of ways, from self-driving cars to advertisement targeting and back. We can improve society by improving how governments function, by helping make resource distribution more equitable, and by bringing greater transparency and accountability to government operations. And perhaps most importantly, we can get AI to do all of our work so that we can just sit back and relax at the beach. But before we rejoice at the possibilities, let's step back and unpack that term, AI. What is AI anyway? Consider the task that many of us attempted with mixed results during the COVID-19 lockdown, and that is baking sourdough bread. I will use this task as my running example to discuss algorithms, data, and decisions. Here's an algorithm for baking sourdough. It is made up of a sequence of 4 steps. The first step is prep. We buy ingredients and we measure them. The second step is mixing. We combine yeast, flour, and water, cover, and wait for the dough to rise. Next, we knead the dough, shaping it, waiting some more, and repeating. And finally, we bake at a particular temperature for a certain length of time. The recipe is an algorithm. It lists the steps that we take to transform the ingredients into a loaf of bread. This algorithm may be fully prescribed. It may list exactly what ingredients to get, how much to take of each ingredient, in what order to combine them, how long to wait, and at what temperature to bake. Such algorithms are called rule-based. The rules are stated, are known and stated ahead of time. If we know these rules well enough to write them down, and if we can always get exactly the same ingredients, then every time we will bake a great loaf of sourdough. But we may not be so lucky. We may not know the rules for making a good loaf of sourdough to begin with. And we may also want to see some variety in the outcomes. An alternative to a rule-based algorithm is one that learns how to bake. How does this work? Well, we may keep the structure of the recipe the same, but try different combinations of ingredients, mixing and kneading techniques, waiting times, and baking temperature and time. And then we may ask a person, do you like how the sourdough came out? And if so, we may keep the same settings or maybe try something slightly different or a lot different and see which results we like better. From this, we can figure out what ingredients and what combinations of parameters work well together. So far, we discussed the algorithm. Now, what about the second ingredient here, the second component, data? Data comes in multiple forms. One form is the combination of ingredients that we take as input. Another form is the parameters of the recipe. And then there is data that describes the output, the loaf that we baked. How much does it weigh? What is its nutritional value? Can we quantify the degree to which it's chewy on the inside and crusty on the outside? These are all objectively measurable factors. The final kind of data is human judgment. Did the loaf come out well enough or not? Is it tasty? Does it look good? This data is the subjective feedback we get on the output. And more often than not, it's more important than some objective properties of the output. We talked about an algorithm and about different kinds of data. Now, what about decisions? In the process we described, a human is making a decision after every execution of the algorithm. And the decision is, does the loaf look good enough to taste? Should I taste it? Is it tasty? Are we giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? A decision that is more consequential is, now that we've tried a bunch of recipes, which will we consider a success? Will we decide to always or never use some specific ingredients or some specific parameters? Will we say that it's more important to have an appetizing looking loaf or one that consistently comes out as chewy on the inside and crusty on the outside? Next up on the more consequential yet scale is, do we think that we've tried out enough recipes to pass our experience on to a machine and to trust it, that machine, to bake on our behalf? Will we trust the machine to bake something different, like baguettes? What about picking different ingredients? What about making judgments on our behalf, deciding which baked goods come out well and which did not come out well? How much autonomy do we give to a machine, to a learning algorithm, to an AI? So what is an AI? I would characterize an AI as a system in which algorithms use data and make decisions on our behalf, or help us, humans, make decisions. An example of an AI is Roomba, a robot that helps us clean. Roomba is great at autonomously vacuuming the floor and is one of the first victories of classical rule-based AI. It's the stuff of textbooks. The decisions a Roomba makes are, what's a good strategy to clean an entire room that it may not have seen before? How should it be mapping out the room? And what is its next move? Go left, go right, or turn around? Another example of a highly successful AI is IBM's Deep Blue that beat Garry Kasparov, the legendary grandmaster, at chess in 1997. Several systems followed, including AlphaZero, that taught itself chess. This success at chess and at learning a game starting from basic rules is one of the holy grails of AI. The decisions in chess are more complex than in Roomba, but they are similar in that they are strategic. What's a good overall strategy to take? What's a meaningful next move? And how do we adjust the strategy in response to the decisions of the opponent. And now enter another application of AI, its use in hiring. The decisions that we are asking an AI to make here are very different from those that are made by Roomba and by Deep Blue. We are asking it to predict who will do well on the job and who will not do well. The big question is, can an AI succeed at this task that amounts to predicting social outcomes? How do we know whether it has succeeded? How do we measure success? And do we even want an AI to be making such predictions? Do we consider that to be ethical? If you'd like to learn more about algorithms, computation, data, and their impacts on society, I highly recommend the recent book, The Age of Algorithms by Serge Abitboul and Julius Dianovich. To quote from this book, algorithms are probably the most sophisticated tools that people have had at their disposal since the beginnings of human history. They have transformed science, industry, and society. They upset the concepts of work, property, government, private life, even humanity. Going easily from one extreme to the other, we rejoice that they make life easier for us, but fear that they will enslave us. Creations of the human spirit, algorithms are what we made them, and they will be what we want them to be. It's up to us to choose the world we want to live in. So let me stop here and let's switch to an interactive conversation with this as our motivating quote.
Thank you so much for the primer, Julia. I'm certain that everyone in the audience is hopefully a bit smarter on AI and responsible AI as a result of it. Let me perhaps take this conversation back to something that you mentioned in the beginning of your introduction, where you mentioned the distribution of resources and the importance of distributing those resources equally and the power of responsible AI and ethical AI as a result of that, and using tools, as we know, called automated decision systems. Can you speak about what everyone in the audience will effectively, at some point in their life, be on the other side of, which is a system that makes a decision on what they get or something that they may not get? If you don't mind sort of sharing what ADS is.
Sure. So automated decision systems, or ADS, have been under the microscope in New York City in particular, and more broadly, of course, in the US and more globally. These are systems where we use data and algorithms, and sometimes algorithms that learn and that make decisions to help make decisions on our behalf. And sometimes these systems, ADS, make decisions autonomously. There is a range of uses that we are seeing in New York City and beyond for such systems, ranging from how resources are distributed in a city, for example, which libraries get funding and which sidewalks are fixed, to deciding or helping decide which children get spots at which schools, helping decide potential employers which candidates look like they are employable and like they will do well on the job. So all of these tasks we have been entrusting to these systems, and an important thing and an important commonality between them is that they all use data, they all make decisions that are impactful, that impact us individually as job seekers, as children, as parents, but also impact and can potentially propel the disadvantage with respect to particular demographic groups, such as individuals with disabilities, such as women when it comes to employment, and people of color.
What's sort of the driving force to the adoption of a lot of these ADS tools, especially when it comes from a government perspective, when it comes to allocation of resources, and what is even the approval process, if you're aware of it, that goes through the implementation of this? Like, it seems like the technology is not ready, but the tools are being deployed.
Right. So there are many kind of questions that are folded into this one, right, Steve? So of course we want to use computational tools, AI or not, to help us be more efficient. Right. We want, for example, in the context of employment, and this is the context that we have been focusing on in New York City, and we'll speak about a bit later. So in this context, efficiencies are both for potential employers who are able to sift through applications much, much faster. And also efficiencies potentially are from the point of view of job seekers whom these systems are helping get matched against jobs that would be appropriate and that they would enjoy working in. So this is the promise. Now, of course, the burden is on the users of technology and on the developers of technology, such as software vendors and such as employers who use these machines, these tools, to show that in fact these tools are improving their processes in terms of efficiency, and at the same time that they are not introducing some discriminatory effects or amplifying discrimination that has existed in society. So at the moment, we are really in a dire need of forming a better understanding of what we can expect these tools to do for us and how we can check that the tools in fact work, that they are delivering on their promise. And
So
there isn't really a culture of that yet, unfortunately.
So can we unpack each one of those? So you mentioned sort of one is the public side of it, and the second is sort of what I would bucket in as auditing. So can you share with us sort of the state of AI auditing today when it comes to sort of unpackaging these tools and determining whether or not they're working, whether they're not working, whether or not they're having expected results, and whether or not they're improving the current state of affairs?
Yeah, so let me once again, just to make this a little bit more concrete, to speak about a particular context in which we want to be overseeing the use of these tools. And this is a law, a proposed law, a bill that is being considered in New York City to regulate the use of automated hiring tools, or hiring ADS, in the city broadly, not only by the city government. We in fact don't know whether the city government uses these tools, but also by private sector employers. So the effort here, the current name of the bill is INT 1894, is to make it so that when algorithmic hiring tools are being used to evaluate job applicants, that these tools need to be audited for bias periodically. This is one portion of the proposed oversight. And the second part is that if a job applicant is being evaluated with the help of these tools, they have to be notified that the tool was used to evaluate their candidacy. And furthermore, they have to be told which specific characteristics the tool used to determine that they are or aren't a good candidate for the position. And so essentially the conversation here is both about whether we need to regulate the use of these tools, whether we need to be doing bias audits and providing public disclosure, and also about how we can in fact do this productively, effectively. So please, let's ask a follow-up, I guess, because this is a very
topic. I guess a follow-up to that is where does that exist? Where does that live under? Whose responsibility is this whole notion of responsible AI? If this law gets passed, where does it live under, and who's responsible for ensuring that there's compliance with the law?
Right. So the way that I like to think about responsible AI is that the machine itself, of course, is not responsible, right? A machine does not have agency. It does not have free will. It cannot exercise discretion. It does not have a sense of humor. So responsibility has to reside with people, with humans. And now who is really responsible for making it so that, say, algorithmic hiring does not further disadvantage individuals with disabilities? Certainly, it's vendors of the tools. They need to ensure that the tools that they produce work and that they do not further discriminate. Certainly, it's the companies or entities more generally that are using these tools to evaluate candidates. But additionally, the responsibility is with all of us to speak up and to make sure that we understand sufficiently the way that these tools are used and the kinds of impacts that they can have on each and every one of us, so that we can hold governments and companies, vendors and employers accountable for these particular tools being deployed.
So perhaps let me ask a closing question here, which is, it sounds like this will be a topic that everyone will be exposed to at some point, whether professionally, personally, as part of resources that they're being allocated to, or resources being allocated to them. What's perhaps from your perspective an action item that all the attendees can take to better understand, I mean, besides listening to your talk and going to various presentations, how important perhaps is either public education from your perspective or education on the topic in general?
Thank you for that question, Steve. So I think that we all are members of the public, irrespective of our job functions. So we should all try to educate ourselves, to form an understanding about what these tools can and cannot do. Don't trust an algorithm just because it produces a decimal number, and therefore we as people are tempted to think that it knows what it's talking about if the answer is 42.7. This is not the case. Algorithms are what we make them, and it's our responsibility to understand and to challenge them. And we will speak today about the importance and the role of public education and public engagement in this ecosystem. And I cannot stress it enough as a technologist that technology here, in some sense, is the easy part. It's really all of us getting on the same page of what we can expect these algorithms to do and what we shouldn't let them do.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your presentation. To all of you that are attendees, if you have questions for Julie, please drop in the Q&A. Please drop them in the Q&A. We will get back to all the questions after the remainder of the presentations. And with that, please join me in welcoming Stefan Verhulst, whose position at the Govlabs is ideally situated to helping us understand one part of what Julia mentioned in her overview of AI, which is the data side of it. So Stefan, if you would please share with us a bit about who you are, what your background is, your work at Govlabs, and then I have a couple of questions for you after you're done with that.
Great, thanks so much, Steve, for having me. And it's always hard to follow Julia on responsible AI and responsible data. But as you mentioned, I'm Stefan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of Govlab, and Govlab is an action research center based here at New York University. So we are part of the Tandon School of Engineering. And our mission is to improve the way we make decisions, leveraging new tools and new technologies. And specifically, we focus on what we believe are two important assets that can be leveraged and should be leveraged in new ways in order to improve the way we make decisions in the public interest. And those two assets are, on the one hand, people. So we do a lot of work around what we call collective intelligence, where we tap and engage with people in new ways to leverage their experience and their expertise to address critical societal problems. And then the other asset, in addition to people, is, surprise, surprise, data. And so here we've done a lot of work on how do we unlock data in a responsible way to inform decisions that can ultimately improve people's lives. And so that's where we are focusing on artificial intelligence, and especially also on how we go about using AI for public decision-making in a responsible way, by focusing also on how we ultimately establish a baseline of data responsibility.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and let's dive right into just that topic, which is this whole notion of data. I think everyone in the audience will agree that there is a clear line to be drawn between data and output of algorithms, and whether you want to call that a barometer for if a system or an algorithm is responsible or ethical or not, you can draw that distinction. So if you can share with us sort of this whole influence on data for responsible AI and your work on what responsible data means to ensure that responsible AI is even possible.
Yeah, and again, we at Govlab have taken a more broader perspective to data responsibility. And we typically, when we talk about data responsibility, we emphasize three perspectives or three types of responsibilities. And ultimately, the combination of those three types of data responsibilities contribute to also, of course, responsible AI. And the first type of data responsibility is the responsibility to protect data subjects from harm or from discrimination in the use or when managing data. And this is a responsibility that doesn't reside at one particular phase of the data lifecycle. It actually resides across the data lifecycle, from collection to storage, to sharing, to analyzing or leveraging algorithms to generate insight, to ultimately also the use of the insight when data has been analyzed. And I think it's important to adopt a end-to-end data responsibility lifecycle, because it is not just one element that can ultimately lead to harm. It is the package of decision-making that ultimately decides or determines how data will be used and what the impact will be of the data enterprise, whether it's a positive or a negative impact. And I think having that end-to-end data responsibility is crucial to also assure a certain level of responsible AI, because it starts at the moment when you actually already collect data and the quality of the data that is being collected as such. The second type of data responsibility is actually the responsibility to provide access to your data when there is a critical public interest at stake. And we have seen this during COVID-19, that we could and can leverage data in order to save lives, whether it is to understand what's the current state of the pandemic, or where ultimately where people are moving, where they are, what's the level of mobility, and how do we anticipate risk when we are leaving our homes. And we can only do that by actually tapping into a diverse set of data, including private sector data. And so our second notion of data responsibility is actually a responsibility to be a good societal player when you have data that ultimately also could improve decisions. And that's through, for instance, data collaboratives, which we have pioneered here at Govlab, which are those new kinds of public-private partnerships. Obviously, there are risks involved, including risks to the corporation, but there are also huge benefits that we could extract if we can find a way to accelerate that in a responsible way. And then the third type of data responsibility is then actually the responsibility to consider the insights when data has provided an insight. And too often what we see is that a lot of the attention in the data space, or also in the AI space, is how you get from data to insight. But ultimately the impact of data doesn't stop there, right? Isn't a result of stopping at the insight stage. The result of the impact is a result of then taking the insight and making decisions in the public interest that are better, more legitimate than before. And so there is a responsibility to go beyond insight to actually also translate that into decisions. And obviously that needs to be done in a responsible way. And so the three types of data responsibility provide for a more richer, also a more a broader concept than just making sure that no one has access to the data, or that data is being hoarded in order to protect it. I think we need a much more sophisticated way of thinking about data responsibility that comprises those three aspects.
But so if you allow me, I want to touch on one subject that you mentioned that I find particularly interesting, that I think is worth discussing. So you said that it's possible when there's a call like a pandemic to action to to use data for societal benefit, which we've seen, as you mentioned, with COVID-19. Why does it take a pandemic for this to happen? And is there some sort of I hesitate to say policy, but some sort of overarching regulation that could put into effect the same sort of state of affairs that we had with COVID-19, that would allow the continued benefit of society, or the continued survival of society, to be that same trigger as COVID-19, to ensure that data responsibility is something that we do from the start. So if you don't mind sort of sharing it.
Very good question, Steve, and unfortunately not an easy one to answer in 5 minutes. But as you know, Steve, I'm also a member of the expert group to the European Commission on business to government data sharing, where we actually look into what are the conditions for business to share data with governments and other players at a time when there is a clear public interest purpose. And the question is indeed, do we need regulation? Do we need some kind of a mandate? And there are already actually three countries in Europe, Estonia, Estonia, the UK, and France, where there is some regulation on the books that can demand access to data from corporations. My view is that it's far more important to actually build the ecosystem for voluntary and, if needed, mandatory kind of sharing. And in order to build that ecosystem, we really need to invest in, at a minimum, three elements. One is we need to have a really good demand for that data and a really good way to assess, is the demand really sufficient to unlock data that might be risky? And so that's where we need the demand side, which could be government, but also society at large, to really step up and decide these are the areas that we want to prioritize in order for sharing to happen. The second thing that needs to happen, Steve, is we need to actually professionalize the supply side of data, by which we need a new profession, a new position within the private sector, which we call chief data stewards, that are responsible to respond to solicitations for their data. At the moment, each time when someone knocks on our door and asks, Stefan, who should we talk to in Corporation X with regard to their data, unfortunately, I always have to tell them, good luck finding out, because there is no designated position. And I think that chief data stewards is actually really important in order to become more of a responsible player around your data, not only by protecting it, but also being able to provide access to it when necessary. And then ultimately, if you have a stronger supply and a stronger demand, we also need to really invest in ways to match demand and supply. And that's both technical, but also governance. And so we need a lot more models here, which we are investing in, on how to do this in a responsible way.
I appreciate the answer. I think that hopefully there's action items for some of the attendees to take who might have organizations that can hire for a chief data steward. Let me perhaps ask you one closing question before we move on, which is, Julia in her introduction mentioned the whole notion of the technology not being the barriers, and we are already in a place where there is sufficient data, sufficient algorithms, and sufficient expertise to build some of the AI tools that can help us work or sit on the beach all day while AI does the rest of the work. Does that same lens exist through the data side? As in you mentioned the whole notion, and I also want to touch on here, if you may, if you can touch on the whole notion of data collaboratives. Like, does the technology exist for us to achieve data transparency? Does the technology exist for us to be able to achieve data transparency, for us to be able to achieve access to data from a corporation, for us to achieve data sharing? Are we there yet from a technology perspective?
Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, we are there. Obviously, there are always some issues that can improve. Typically, those issues, from a technical point of view, are focused on issues of transfer, issues of storage, including secure cloud, for instance, kinds of concepts, but also issues of authorization, i.e., how do you manage who has access to the data and under what conditions. So there are all kinds of technologies there that already exist, but could be improved with regard to authorization. And then there are issues, of course, on how do we, for instance, ensure privacy and a certain level of de-identification when we provide access to the data in an aggregated and anonymized way. So there are definitely issues still that needs to be resolved. But in principle, this can happen. I think the biggest challenges are more at the socio-technical layer, but which typically are how do we govern access? And here, quite often, governance is expressed in terms of data sharing agreements. And as we all know, the moment lawyers are enter the room, then it becomes complicated. And I have no, anyway, this is not a critique on the profession here, but it's just because we haven't found a way to streamline data sharing agreements. And then we have other elements of governance, which include who can decide and how would you decide what are important public interest purposes. And I think here we really need to engage with the public. From my point of view, as a society, we have not engaged the public enough to really have a conversation about reuse of data or the use of AI for particular kind of purposes, so that we can understand what are red lines and what are actually areas where the public and society at large would actually embrace certain kinds of use cases that, of course, still need to be done under sufficient governance structures. And that's where we have experimented with citizens' assemblies. So we had a data assembly here in New York City around the use of data and AI for COVID-19. And this is also what we're going to do in a new initiative, which we call AI localism, where we're actually going to engage with citizens and residents of cities in order to understand what are their expectations on how AI is used, but also what would be their preferences with regard to the use of AI in a particular kind of area.
Thank you. That was extraordinarily helpful. I hope the attendees took note. Those, I know he said it was a short amount of time, but you compacted a lot of very useful information. Thank you so much, Stefan. Always a pleasure to hear you speak about these topics.
Thank you.
Up next, it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Corbett, who we're going to talk to very briefly about the role of public education when it comes to responsible AI. So Eric, if you don't mind, give me a quick introduction and then we'll go into some questions.
Yeah, so name's Eric Corbett. I'm a postdoc at NYU. Specifically, I'm in the Tandon School of Engineering in the Center for Urban Science and Progress. I'm a Smart Cities postdoctoral associate there. I completed my PhD at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I am now here in Brooklyn doing research in CUSP, and my agenda is thinking about designing new modes of public engagement for AI, specifically in how it's used in local government context. And I'm working with Dr. Dianovich and in her efforts to run the Center for Responsible AI. So I found a nice home here based off of some of my background, which was largely on trust in democracy and thinking through challenges that technologies present for trust, but then also how can we, through a more critical approach, use trust to improve the design of technologies to facilitate democracy. There's a little bit of from my background that I'm bringing to this space now.
So let me ask you perhaps a provocative question, which is it possible to get widespread public education on responsible AI?
Yes, it's very provocative. I think so. It is. Right now, I'm in fact working on a course that's entitled AI for the People. And so the goal of this course is to address, what we see at the Center for Responsible AI is a major gap in how we can bring about responsible AI, and that is sort of what form of literacy does the general public need regarding AI, because that's not settled on, right? We're sort of in the wild, wild west in that regard. And so what I found is that most AI education material is either A, for formal learning environments, or B, assumes the learner is pursuing a professional engineering career. And so as a result of that, the kind of literacy for the broad public, I would say the other 99% that are not in college or not pursuing data science or software engineering careers is largely unaddressed. So right now, to address this challenge, this gap in what this broad sped general AI education could look like, we're partnered with Queens Public Library and a peer-to-peer university to design this course. Again, it's called AI for the People, and it's going to be ran as a part of the Queens Public Library's existing digital literacy programming. And so it doesn't require math, it's free, and most importantly, it doesn't try to turn people into experts or software engineers, whether it's focused on providing that basic AI literacy necessary for critical civic engagement with the growing role of AI in everyday life. So that's a very tangible thing that is going on at the center right now as we speak.
What do you mean by civic engagement from perhaps a policy and role of technology and democracy perspective? Like, what is it, why does the general public need to understand the concept of responsible AI, especially as it relates to some of these policies that Julia discussed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think to some extent it depends on, how we define democracy, which, is, I don't mean to go down a intellectual rabbit hole here, but please indulge me for a second. It's surprisingly hard to do, right? So is democracy an idea? Is it a principle? Are we talking about representative or direct democracy? Personally, for me, I like to think about democracy as this process, a collective, ongoing process of figuring out how we want to live together, right? And so from that perspective, the extent to which these automated decision-making systems are embedded in the decision-making machinery of governance, as a you can make a strong argument that this AI literacy is actually a fundamental part of this broader set of civic literacy that is so vital to a functioning democracy.
Right. Totally. I mean, and I know. Let me sort of perhaps ask this next question, and maybe the last one, so we can get some Q&A on something that you mentioned in your introduction, which is trust in systems, right? Because I think we're at a point where it's sort of I'd say a fork in the road for AI, where there's a lot of dystopian potential for how AI is going to be deployed in society. And I know, from your introduction that you mentioned this whole notion of trust in systems. So, if you can very briefly also indulge us in this whole notion of what it means to trust the AI systems that eventually will govern how we live our everyday lives, and perhaps tie it back to this whole notion of literacy and responsible AI. And I know that's a very tall order, but perhaps if you can help the attendees better understand this whole notion as best possible.
Yeah, you lost me when you said briefly, but I will. I'm gonna try to respect that nonetheless.
Please.
So first, another rabbit hole. I think this is. I have to say that if we use the term trust in its purest form, from like a moral philosophical standpoint, trust requires an intentional betrayal of someone's goodwill. So the question of trustworthy AI, I think, is moot until we reach the state of general AI, right? And we're not there yet. When we get to general AI, then I think we can have a conversation about trust in this pure sense of the word in an AI, when an AI has this sort of moral intentionality to betray someone's goodwill. So I'm a trust purist. I'm a bit of a nerd because my dissertation was on this, so I have to put that out there. But I understand that most people don't use trust in the pure sense of the term. So to answer the question, regardless, I would say that I like to think about trust in terms of this concept of distance, right? So the greater the distance I experience from something or someone introduces uncertainty, which makes trust harder to reach, harder to enact, right? Because trust is fundamentally a process of overcoming uncertainty. So in regards to AI, I think a useful way of thinking about trust in regards to these systems is thinking about closing that distance that people experience, right? This distance in knowledge from AI, this distance in power in terms of decision-making, even the social distance from the development of these systems. So we know who's in these rooms doing the development, we know who's at these engineering schools, and we know who aren't, right? From a demographic and cultural standpoint, right? So there's a social distance there. And so I think to tie that all back together, I really see the education programming that we're working on and the legal work and some of the legal efforts that Julia was talking about earlier from the center as a collective, I see these as vehicles almost for closing that distance, right? So in order for us to have trust, we have to be close enough to overcome the uncertainty, and the education and these policies are vehicles to closing that distance.
Right. I know that there's so much more there to unpack, but let's perhaps pause there and ask Stefan and Julia to rejoin us. And I see that both Stefan and Julia have been hard at work at sharing a number of the questions that were asked. So thank you both for doing that. Let me perhaps, while we wait for other questions to come in, ask all of you, what's next? Where do we go from here? You know, as we said, the technology already exists. AI is commonplace. Are we at a point where we need to go back and rebuild what is built, or, you know, do we focus on policy questions? What in, you know, from all three of your perspectives is the most important thing that we as a society need to do to move towards a more responsible AI future? Just very, very briefly, perhaps starting with Julia, who spoke first.
Sure. So the time is now for us to act. And one of the questions, or several of the questions that were asked, spoke to this. And in many domains, I don't want to sound alarmist, but in many domains, harms are just so vast that we have to work very hard to undo them. And unfortunately, automated hiring systems are one such domain. And so there is an urgent need for us to come together to come up with meaningful ways to regulate in domains in which algorithms and computational systems are used to impact people's lives. And we need all hands on deck here. If we have the resources to deploy these tools, we must have the resources to oversee them. Otherwise, we simply just cannot deploy them.
Thank you. And Stefan, you mentioned, you know, government participation. What are you seeing as, you know, in terms of like perhaps, you know, to make it simple to sort of explain, like percentage of government participation on topics and conversations like this as a percentage of all governments around the world? Is it half of all countries care about topics like this? Is it 5%? Is it 90%? Where do we stand?
Hard to put a percentage on, Steve. As you know, it's hard to estimate those kinds of engagements. But I think it's fair to say that there is a lack of sophistication quite often. That does not mean a lack of intention, right? But a lack of sophistication to really tackle some of those issues. And I think it is not easy. As I said, it's not just a technical challenge, it's a socio-technical challenge that we seek to address. But I think the role of government, and especially government officials, is to also be able to point to where we want to ultimately go, and then align technology with that vision and with the objectives that we have. And I think, yes, we need to be reactive, and I agree with Julia, is that we will have to really step up oversight, and we really have to redesign certain kinds of practices that are currently being used. But we also have to be more proactive so that we can actually shape the market for responsible AI by showing these are the elements we actually would like to have AI used for. Just to use employment, for instance, but meaning knowing what are the skills that are going to be required in 2025 based upon prediction of where the jobs will be is an important insight to have, so that you ultimately can align your education system, you can align people to get ready to also think ahead as opposed to be taken by surprise. And that's an AI concept. It's definitely less harmful and more beneficial than, for instance, using AI to screen people based upon a set of metrics that A, are not transparent, and B, very flawed, especially given the poor data that is being used to do so. So having a more proactive market shaping agenda would actually be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stefan. And Eric, a quick question to you. You mentioned this whole this P2PU partnership, the class. How is it going to be accessible, and how widely is it going to be distributed? If you can speak to that briefly. There's a couple of questions around that.
Yeah, so I think that we're still very much so in the development stages of this. So the logistics of how it will be distributed are forthcoming, but as of now, this is going to be included as a part of Queens Public Library's existing digital literacy and adult education training programs. Obviously, right now we're in the pandemic, so it's going to be online. So it's going to be through Zoom. More than likely for the first part of when it's launched, I think we're trying to get this up and rolling in the spring. So it'll be primarily through Zoom. Eventually, fingers crossing, we're talking about vaccines in April. We might have some actual in-person trainings, but it's basically you know, a group of people, anybody who wants to sign up. There'd be about 12 people per course, and the idea is that a facilitator will guide people through some of these basic AI literacy concepts, and then we'll tie that into opportunities for civic engagement locally, using some of the skill sets that are developed inside of the class. So it's really, I don't even like to think about it as a pure education situation. It's more about engendering a sense of agency and actually tying that into specific things that are going on in the city that people can perform and enact, right, their agency. So I do believe that we'll have all of that information either on the Center for Responsible AI website at some point. It'll be on Queens Public Library's information at some point. I'm sure we'll have a lot of announcements. If Julia has any other background on the logistics and the launch of that, I would defer to her.
Yes, so we are looking forward to, after the initial pilot with the Queens Public Library, to making it so that the materials that we're developing are used by other libraries in New York City, more broadly in the US and even worldwide. So our partner P2PU has had success in delivering these types of materials broadly, worldwide. And we also want folks who, you know, don't have time to come to the library perhaps for the full engagement to still be able to access our materials. So please reach out to us if you think that your organization would benefit from some information of this sort, and we would be more than happy to work with you.
Yeah, actually, Julie, if you allow me, I have one final question that I want to ask you, because I imagine that every one of the attendees has this burning question on their back of their minds, which is, you know, you mentioned this whole notion of public disclosure as part of the New York bill, and you know, Stefan also mentioned this whole notion of as well, which is we're going to receive information that will help us understand how AI or ADS systems have judged us. You know, I know you have a lot of research in the space. What do you imagine might be a way for us to be able to consume that data? Because it's going to be, you know, as Eric mentioned, something that we might not have trusted. So how do we consume that data from your perspective?
Thank you for this question, Steve. So here I would like to bring up my favorite metaphor, and that is a nutritional label. So what I imagine we will be able to have is nutritional labels that summarize for us individuals being affected by these systems, consumers, users, but more broadly than users, really just people, where we would see how these particular tools are impacting us. And so in the context of hiring, I think that this is a very appropriate way for us to think, and that is we should be disclosing to individuals what features were used to screen them out, for example. And so if you show to an individual who is colorblind, for example, that the reason that they did not pass an online interview was that they could not quickly enough tell apart the green squares from the red squares, they will know that this is something that happened and that is due to their disability. And if we have this mechanism to tell members of the public, to tell job seekers what went wrong or what happened, they can then contest these decisions without having to proactively disclose their disability status necessarily. So having public disclosure will really allow us to enact oversight that goes far beyond what can be done with a simple bias audit. And so I think that that's really a crucial component here. And of course, for us to be able to have something like a nutritional label on these tools, we have to also explain to members of the public what is the equivalent of a calorie and what is the equivalent of trans fat. What is a feature? And this is really the importance of these education and public engagement efforts that Eric spoke about earlier, that kind of closes the loop on this entire narrative.
Well, I certainly don't want to know how many AI calories I consume because it's probably far too many. But I hope that there's a future in which we see these nutritional labels show up on the tools we use every day and the tools that affect us in everyday life. I want to thank all three of you. This was, I hope, incredibly insightful for every one of our attendees. To close, I think all three of you mentioned that this is the time to do this. We're all responsible for our own education in AI. We need to understand how it works. We need to understand what it means to have responsible AI. And hopefully in the coming weeks and months, the course that Julia and Eric are working on will become public, not only through QPL, but for all of you to be able to access, to consume, and to be on the other end of an education responsible AI. So you know and understand how these tools affect you, know and understand what compliance is, and know and understand what it means when one of these tools is used to either prevent you from receiving something, or if you receive something, why you received it. Elizabeth, any closing words from you and Schneps Media?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for being here. This was certainly a very insightful webinar, and it will be available, it was recorded, and it will be available on the Schneps Media YouTube channel, so people can watch it again and also share it with others. And also, I'd love to be able to share with everyone, and I can do that via email, where they may be able to reach out and get further information. So we can go ahead and do that. But truly, thank you. This has been a remarkable hour, and I appreciate your time. Attendees, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you on another webinar soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank
and
you, everyone.
stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.